the roof collapsed. So you said you're going to make the best of it. You place schach in the roof. So now technically you have a kosher sukkah, right? You have 4 walls. Imagine if this room would be a penthouse and the ceiling fell in, and now you decided you're going to cover the ceiling with schach, with kosher schach. You put some bamboo sticks around across, and now you have a good kosher sukkah. What's wrong? You have 4 walls, or you only need 3 walls, and you have schach. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda said. Amar lefanav Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi said to him, Rebbe Paresh. Rebbe, you need to go ahead and explain what you said. You mean you made a statement without clarifying your the meaning, the case of your statement, because it's not true that it would be kosher under all circumstances, because we all know that when a roof caves in, a lot of times the sides of the roof are still intact. It's the center, let's say, the weight of the roof might have rain or other things. And peripheral parts of the ceiling are still intact. Peripheral parts of the ceiling are still intact. So not directly connected to the kosher schach. You want to match. So if it's not directly walls and the schach, let's say here we have kosher schach over here. So if the ceiling is still intact on the corner, it all depends how far, how wide is the ceiling extend up to 4 amot. We could say that the wall will turn. If ceiling that's not kosher schach is not wider than 7 feet, will come closer. And let's say that box, the first box, this box is less than 7 feet. So let's say the schach, and I put the schach up to here, the wall to turn up to here, and move. We have 4 turns up to. It can only move up to what? 4 amot. So therefore, he needs your statement. So therefore, he was telling him you can't. It's not appropriate for you to make a statement without clarifying. People might make a mistake. Now, it could be you're under the impression that everybody understands what you're talking about. You don't need to explain it, but he tells them you need to explain it. He says, we're on Yudchet Amen Aleph, 18a, 18a3. Doresh Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Bayish nifchat v'sikeich al gabav. A house that caved in and you put schach on top, keshera, it's kosher. Now, Amar lefon Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Perish, you have to explain your words. Kach Perish Abba. My father explained it the following: Arba amot sulah. If the distance between the wall and the kosher schach, if they're still in the outside near the walls are still not kosher schach, if it's still ceiling, if there is 4 amot of not kosher schach psulah, but only pochot ma'arba amot, if it's less than 4 amot, then it's keshera. Less than 4 amot between the wall and the kosher schach, then we could say the wall turns, and the not kosher schach becomes part of that wall. Okay, Darash Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi. Another statement from this Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eloi. Avroma. Avroma is a small fish, and he says this small fish shariat. This small fish is kosher. You're allowed to eat this small fish. Now, what's the issue? What's the issue regarding this small fish? The issue is that it's very difficult to tell the difference between this fish and other not kosher fish when they're mixed together. They're very small fish, They look very similar to each other. Sometimes the fins, maybe the scales and fins and scales aren't so clear. And therefore, when they're mixed together with other fish, you sometimes can make a mistake. Is this a kosher fish? And you might come to eat the not kosher fish together with it. So therefore, but he says over here, he says the avroma is sharia. He says it's not a problem. You could go ahead and you could eat this avroma fish. And now the question is, why not? Why isn't it concerned that this avroma fish gets mixed up together with other fish? You go ahead and you capture this fish and you put into your net, you got into your net this fish. Maybe there's other fish that come together with this fish and they're hard to distinguish between this fish and the other fish. So why is it that he says it's permitted? So comes Amar Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, I want to tell you, you need to explain yourself because it's not true. He says it's not true that this avroma, this type of fish, is always kosher. It depends where you captured this avroma fish. He says, Kach Oma Abba, my father, Rebbe Pirish, my father explained the following. He said, Rabbi Shmuel's father, Rabbi Yossi, said, Shemokom Ploni Asura. If the fish were caught in a certain river, that river carries with it the not kosher fish, and it's very hard to discern between this type of fish and the other similar not kosher fish that grows in that river. And people go ahead and make a mistake, and they'll come to eat the not kosher fish.
Rabbi,
however,
this supersedes the snapir v'kaskeset requirement. Isn't that the simple test?
Right. So either it's that it's hard to see. Let's say that it has to have the fins and scales in order for it to be kosher, but it could be that this other fish looks so much similar to that fish, that little fish with their fins and scales, that when you look at it, you'll come to think that you have this. That's all you might. That it's like this one, but it's hard for you to be. You have to be very examined very closely, and people make a mistake. It's hard to the average person, if you're not on top of it in a very serious way, the average person can make a mistake. That's what it seems that says. Rashi says it's hard to distinguish. We're going to see in a moment. There's a certain fish, which maybe we can explain it this way. Another possibility. There's a certain fish that when it grows, in the beginning of its growth, it does not have fins and scales. Good morning, Dr. Moshe. The fins and scales only come on later on in its growth. And according to halacha, you could eat that fish even before it grew the fins and scales. If you know that this fish was going to grow the fins and scales. But since now, when it's young, it doesn't have the fins and scales, because Jaime was asking the question, Rabbi, what's the problem? Look, if it's fins and scales, that's a kosher fish. No fins and scales, so it should be easily discernible. So but this type of fish that's going to grow the fins and scales later on, and therefore, when it's young, the fish, it doesn't have those kosher signs of fins and scales yet. So it's very difficult to tell the difference between this kosher fish, which is going to have the fins and scales, and that not kosher fish that grows in the same habitat that looks like that's never going to get its fins and scales. So therefore, you should only eat from this kosher fish that's going to grow the fins and scales if it grows in a river that only has this type of fish. It doesn't grow that other similar fish that's not kosher without fins and scales. So that's what the Gemara is going to say. If you want, the only way you could be confident that you're not going to make a mistake if this river only grows. Okay, so the Gemara is going to suggest certain conditions. We're going to see that in a moment, but doesn't it, we're going to, we're going to see what the Gemara is going to identify. We'll see if we can figure out which place of the world that is. Look what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, "Shamoka plonia surah, shamoka plonia muteret." He says, no, you got to explain yourself. It's not true. This little fish, it's not kosher in all places. It depends which place this fish is growing. Now the Gemara is going to Shkiha, Dama Abaye. We found Abaye said this distinction, that he said, Hai Sachanta, the Sachanta fish. The Sachanta fish is what we said before, is this fish that grows in the beginning without fins and scales, and it only gets its fins and scales later on in its growth. The Bav Nahara, if it's in the Bav River. Now, let's see if they translate where the Bav River is. If it's the river of Bav. Anybody know where the river of Bav is? I presume it's in Bavel, because the rabbis here are in Babylon. You know what I'm saying? So I presume we could try to find out where the Bav River is. The Bav River is permitted. If you go to the Bav River, Mr. Hay, this fish, you're good. Good morning. So the Bav is the Sharia. My time. What's the reason? What's unique about this Bav River that this little kosher fish is kosher? If you're going to tell me because the water, there's very strong tides, the water moves very, it's a fast flowing river of water, and because there's a lot of water running very fast, the high dag tameh, and this dag tameh, the similar fish of this sahanta fish, it's the one that looks like it, which is not kosher, the lesle chuta shidra, it doesn't have a spinal cord. It's missing some of the way, let's say they translate the chut hashidra, is because it doesn't have a spinal cord. And since it has no spinal cord, it won't be able to live in this habitat of a fast running water habitat, and therefore it wouldn't live. And if therefore you wouldn't have, you could, as the expression goes, you could bet your bottom dollar. I don't recommend betting, but you can know there's no not kosher fish in that habitat because they can't survive. It has no spinal cord. But that's not true, the Gemara says. And you're going to say, it's not able to stand. We find that there are many rivers that are moving very strongly. The waters are moving swiftly. And this not kosher fish, which never grows fins and scales, that's why it's not kosher, is able to grow in such a habitat where the waters are going pretty fast. So you can't tell me that that's the uniqueness of the Bav River, that the Bav River is kosher because the not kosher fish wouldn't be able to remain there because the waters move fast. That's not a reason, because we see they're able to live in such an environment that the waters are running fast. Ella, meaning Ella mishum de malichimaya. Maybe you're going to tell me that the reason why it can't go ahead and last is because the waters of the Bav River are salty. And since it's salty, if it doesn't have the scale on the not kosher fish, so it doesn't protect itself from the salt. And since it doesn't protect itself from the salt, so therefore, it won't be able to live in such an environment. And therefore, if you find a fish in that river, you know that fish is only the kosher fish, because that's the only, Hashem makes the kosher fish, which with the scales, which is symbolic of a protection, which is symbolic of the Jew. You got to protect yourself from outside forces, right? I never thought about it in that way, but that's maybe the possible the idea of the scales, the fins and scales. The fins, that fins, you got to be able to flow and go and move, but you have to, at the same time, you have to go ahead and protect yourself from You have to shield yourself, right? You got the scales on you. That's going to protect you from the have to protect yourself from the outside forces, and therefore it can protect yourself from the salt. But the not kosher fish, it doesn't have the protection. They don't have the scales, are not protected from the salt, and therefore they can't live in such a bad river if it's salty. But the Gemara says that's not true. We see that this not kosher fish, even though it doesn't have the scale, is still able to live in an environment that's salty. Even though it doesn't have the protection of the scales, it can still live in such a salty environment. So therefore, what's so unique about the Bav River, that the Bav River, you can eat this stachanta fish, and there's no other fish that's not kosher that's similar to this not kosher, this kosher fish, and you won't make the mistake. So the Gemara says, Ela mishum the lo marbe tinayu dag tameh, because the habitat of this river, the mud, the earth of this river is not able to go ahead and develop in this habitat this not kosher fish, because you need, it depends on the mud, the dirt of the ground that the river is in, that develops these types of not kosher fish, and they won't be able to grow in this type of development, and therefore that's why you could know there's only kosher fish in this. Say it again. Oh, how do we get the fish business? Very good. Because the way the Gemara, one area, when a rabbi says a statement, there's a lot of times the Gemara, as you know, originally was Balpeh, they learned by heart. They would group the different statements of that same rabbi, even if that rabbi was talking about various topics. So this rabbi, Rav Simloi, spoke about Sukkah. He opened up about Sukkah, and then when he said something about Sukkah, and he also said something about fish. So that's how the Gemara is listing different statements that this rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda ber Rabbi Eloi, that's how he got into the fish. He was the one who made he made a statement about this avruma fish. He spoke about this avruma fish. He said this avruma fish is kosher, and he did not clarify himself and say, it's specific to a specific area, which would seem to indicate that he holds that we don't have to worry, and maybe people are able to distinguish enough between the two, and you don't have to be so concerned that people are going to make a mistake. But the other rabbi came and said, no, it depends on where this fish is growing, but it's easy to make mistakes. I just want to share with you, when you buy fish, there's something called hashgacha tamidit on fish, right? Let's say dagim tuna, right? Everyone heard of dagim tuna? What's unique about dagim? What's unique about dagim? I was from the first companies that had a mashgiach tamidit, that had a mashgiach there constantly to observe that when they're catching the fish, when they put that they're watching to make sure that when they separate the fish, you're only getting fish. You're not getting the other non-kosher fish are mixed together. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a whole letter where he requires that level of supervision on fish. He does, meaning OU tuna, Rav Moshe might not, I don't think, at least at the time that he wrote his letter, he did not meet his requirements to what he felt was necessary. We have, but other rabbis obviously felt it was sufficient. But there's a higher level of supervision on dagim tuna than other. But now there's other hashgachot that also have certain, depends on the supervision, to ensure that the not kosher fish get mixed up in because I'm saying when you go catch fish, I'm saying there's the octopus, I don't know what they call it. Maybe dolphin, other types of fish get mixed. Be careful, the other types are not mixed together with the fish that you're. that they're using. Right, because you don't see the siman, you don't see the fins and scales, because they removed it already. You don't know that. Right. The only question is, do people feel? I mean, if because you don't see the siman. Right. The question would be, is the color sufficient or not over there? But in general, I mean, but I'm saying, but the idea is, in general, you have to see the sign. In general, you have to see the signs of the. You can't tell. And also, you should know that, Lower East Side, there's a lot of Chinese stores over there. And I was told that a lot of times, there are people that go into a store, and if you turn your head a second, a lot of times they switch the kosher fish and the not kosher. If they're gonna, when they prepare it for you, there's a lot. When you're dealing with people, there's a lot going on. Certain not kosher fish is much less expensive than certain kosher fish. With talip, what a tilapia, and certain type of fish. And I once heard a rabbi. There's a Rabbi Goldberg from the OU. He's a friend of mine. He is head of fish, the fish department in the OU. He spoke at our Shabbatons, and he was saying how sometimes they pull fast ones. You know what I mean? You go into a store and you take their fish, and then they, if they're gonna cut it up, if they're gonna do something, they're gonna skin it for you, whatever they do. You have to what you got to be aware. You know what I'm saying? It's like anything else. If you're not dealing with people that are, if people are only out for the money, and that, you don't know what. Okay, so the Gemara says, what's the reason why it's kosher? Now the Gemara says, but Amar Ravina says, Va'itna, but today, in our days, things have changed. You know what has changed? The Shafri Nahar Eitan and Nahar Gamdal Hatam. They moved, they directed the river, other rivers into the Bav River. So it used to be that the Bav River only had this kosher fish, and the not kosher little fish did not grow there because the environment, the dirt on the ground, was not able to grow this not kosher fish. But now they redirected waters from other rivers, which grow this fish, and now have directed those waters to the Bav River. So therefore, once they redirected the waters, so now already we have those not kosher fish mixed in. So today, the Shafchina Eitan Hagam Hatam Asira. Then you're not allowed to go ahead, and you can't go ahead and take this small fish, this Sechanta fish, that you originally, this fish that was usually, you were confident there was no not kosher fish growing in this environment because it physically was not able to grow this not kosher fish. But today that things have been redirected, was probably with time, you see how they redirected rivers already back then. Not something that, we think about now, with the Niagara Falls and other, something that they're doing work on certain things, they redirect things. But even back then, almost 2,000 years ago, they were redirecting rivers, and things have changed. The halacha changes as the actual situation of changed. Have a great day, everybody. So we got into the fish today, everybody. All the best, everybody. Jaime, we were saying that the dagim tuna, the certain agencies have a mashgiach to midit, a supervising person. They're always to supervise that the not kosher fish do not get mixed into the kosher fish. Therefore,
I think it's easier to always just eat salmon.
Okay, but it's not always practical for everybody.
I know. I'm only kidding. Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.